So, as you know, my name's Madeline, and I am a fourth year bio student at UVic, and I am also the director of communications for the Elect Her Club. And so, Elect Her is sort of our goal is to promote women and people of marginalized genders to sort of aspire to be in positions of leadership. Usually we've been focused more on politics, but this year we're sort of expanding just to women in leadership in general. And so we do this sort of through events like this, panel discussions. We've done a few just like networking events, things like that. And so, yeah, we're super glad to have this sort of speaker series going as we're all online. So it's a good way to sort of keep the community involved. And so before we get going, I'll just do a quick territorial acknowledgement. As I'm in UVic, I would like to acknowledge with respect that I live upon the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich people's territory, and that their vital relationships with the land continue to this day. And so that's sort of adopted from the UVic official one. And so with that, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. And if you'd like to give sort of a short introduction, and then we'll get going.
Hello, everybody. My name's Virginia Rouslin. I live in North Saanich. I am originally from Calgary, Alberta. I met one of your colleagues, Alina, through the Canadian International Committee in Victoria, which is the largest in Canada. And I think a lot of that has to do with a lot of foreign service officers have moved out here rather than retiring in Ottawa in the snow. Alina, and I met Alina because she sat at my table at one of the lunches, and she reminded me of students that I had worked with at the University of Cincinnati when I was in charge of student media. And it was quite an amazing ride for 9 years for all of these kids who wanted to be good journalists, and there was no journalism school. And I didn't have a lot of backup, but they were amazing. And some of them are still my friends, and I know some of them are still working in journalism. So that's how I connected with Alina.
And so how did you end up in Cincinnati or at the University of Cincinnati?
I started at the University of Alberta. I got a degree in political science. I was active in the University of Alberta Liberal Party, and I was the president 1 year. And then I had a year of law school, and then I left, and I went to Toronto, and I got a job in a publishing company, and I met my husband one weekend. He was at Cornell, which is just south of Toronto, but it's a very bad ride along the snowy, anyway, we got married. We moved to New Jersey. I went to graduate school at Rutgers, and then we moved to Cincinnati, where I became a journalist.
And so at Rutgers, you did a master's in literature?
In Victorian literature, yes.
Oh, okay, yeah. And so how did you when did you decide you were going to sort of transition from the law side into the journalism side?
Yeah, it's interesting because I majored in political science. Actually, the Victorians were the great political scientists. I mean, they wrote a lot. They thought a lot about what had happened with respect to Darwin and all of the changes that were happening in society. And they wrote a lot. It wasn't just literature. I mean, they were great essayists. And I had some great professors at Rutgers, including a woman named Virginia Tiger, who got her degree at UBC.
Oh, small world.
Yeah, and she was, I did my master's special thing was to do with her, and it was Canadian women writers who they were pioneer women writers.
Oh.
And many of them came from sort of the middle class of England or the upper middle class, but they married the sons who weren't number one who got the stuff. So they moved over. They thought, oh, great, let's go to Canada. This will be fun. And here they were in the rough. So some of them would be Susanna Moody. You might have heard of her. Mm-hmm. And some of them were like they were on the prairies living in a terrible huts. Mm. They had no idea what they were coming to because the Canadian government and said, come on down, just prove it up and you'll be happy. And it was a very tough life for them. And so I really, I had a very happy life and I had a middle class life and I had no idea what my ancestors had to go through to get us there. So that's why I got involved into literature.
And then how did that sort of then head towards journalism?
When we moved to Cincinnati, I had written a couple of pieces. The one on the Victorian women, two pieces have been published. One in the Dalhousie Review. Do you hear that noise? I'm going to close the door.
Oh.
I don't know what it is. Sorry.
No, it's no worries.
And I took it to the editor of Cincinnati Magazine, thinking he would say, well, what do you know? So he said, would you like to do a story on the PBS station here, which was the first station. And they never really, they should have been doing a lot of really hard-hitting journalism, and they really were just talking about, it's a lovely day out here. So that's how I started. Wow. And I became a staff writer. Mm-hmm. And I did stories on the longest running children's show called Uncle Al's Show.
Oh.
Yeah, well, I knew nothing about children's television, but I became very involved. I interviewed Mr. Rogers and
really?
Captain Kangaroo. Yeah,
wow.
It was but the show was a bad thing because it basically was all about the sponsors getting the kids to like whatever. Mm. And so they reneged. They said I couldn't come with my boss's little girl to one of the shows, and went on from there. Anyway, it was an interesting time. I moved on to the it's called WLW. It's a radio station and television station in Cincinnati. It's WLW in the very early days of radio was a 500,000 watt station. Then it became 50,000 watt station because the government wouldn't let it be larger. And that's where Doris Day, Rosemary Clooney, the Mills brothers, they all got their start.
Wow.
Yeah, so I worked there. I was a special news producer for specials, which included What Women Won't Do to Be Beautiful.
Very little.
Well, a lot. I mean, I was in an operating room where a woman who was a very small woman that was having breast implants. Mm. Yeah. And then I went over to the University of Cincinnati, which is where how I met people like Alina.
Right. And then you had mentioned that you were working in a trade office. Is that correct?
That's right. I'm just gonna, can I do this? This would be in the mid to late 80s. The government of Canada, it would be called External Affairs, excuse me, decided that they couldn't have, there were a lot of, excuse me, embassies, one embassy and consulates. They were in big cities, and they didn't have a lot of time to devote to, excuse me, how to really figure out what a place ticks,
Right.
which I would say Christy Freeland and her people have done. So they were really sort of solidified around, consular issues, getting people, or in the case of Detroit, that so many things to do with the Great Lakes or transporter issues. So they wanted somebody who had a lot of contacts or who could make contacts. And my territory would be Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia. So that was interesting. So, you've heard of Mitch McConnell, right?
Yes.
So there you go. This is when he was just kind of starting out, and my job was to understand the Kentucky-Canada trade issues. And did he know how much trade issues supported people in his state? And also, it wasn't just him, but there would have been other senators, and a lot of Congress people. Now in Kentucky in those days, I think they had 7 congressmen, and now they have 5. So that tells you what's happening there. And I had to promote Canadian culture, which has found a lot of trouble. I'm joking. People loved they loved Canadians. They who knew? And Canadian studies encouraging professors to begin or add Canadian portions to their syllabus. And one of the big things that we did do was Kentucky was so open, as opposed in a way to Ohio. Like Cincinnati is a very old city. They've got this fabulous May Festival and a symphony that is unrivaled, and they've kind of got it all together. And you have to find presenters who want to take a chance on Canadian artists. And they were in West Virginia and Kentucky. So we did a 5-day Canada celebration in Kentucky.
Wow.
We had the Le Grand Ballet Canadien. We had 2 National Public Radio shows. Yeah, I know.
Wow.
But they just, Kentuckians were, and there's a lot of trade in Canadian. There was Alcan Aluminum and Canadian Mist, which you would think it's from Canada. I think it's came on a train, and they bottled it there, and they had a lot of people got jobs. And one of the interesting things is when we moved here, somebody told me that one of the artists from the Great Western Orchestra, which was 3 guys from Alberta, who had moved here, and we're now friends. Yeah, we all lived at Dean Park.
Wow.
Yeah.
I did not know Canada was so popular with people in Kentucky.
Well, they didn't know, but they were always open.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was, I don't know that was just my little corner of the world. I worked with a lot of other people who were like in LA, and they had very sophisticated networks, but I had just started opening up networks because there really wasn't much going on. And by the way, there are 15 of us who were former PURPA officers, we're called, and we found one another, and we're having our second Zoom meeting in a couple of weeks. People in Buffalo, in Atlanta, LA, Dallas, yeah.
That'll be so nice. How was the first one, if this is the second?
The first one was interesting because we were all kind of getting together to see, well, what are you doing?
Right.
And some people looked fabulous. They hadn't changed, and other people you needed to see their name underneath
Right.
who they were. But that's, you know, it's been 20 years. So,
And then was there anything sort of that came after that, or was that your,
well,
what are
we'll
you,
meet again.
yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think most of us, the only Canadians would be those who worked in the Detroit consulate, and they lived in Windsor.
Mm.
So they commuted every day. So there'll be those. A fellow who worked in San Francisco just moved to Victoria.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
so he's in Vic West. And there's another fellow who's a lawyer in Edinburgh, but he works in Portland every 2 months. So the three of us put it together. A lot of people are in Los Angeles. Even people who used to work in Ottawa
Oh,
are in Los Angeles. Yeah.
that's
So
great.
what we will be hearing on December 2nd will be about the election.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Tears, probably.
Right.
Hope, I guess. Yeah.
Well, you've had a very interesting career, and I don't know, do we miss any big parts of it in the little journey there?
Sorry, what?
Is there any other sort of like parts of your career that we sort of missed in that description?
Well, all along the way, I've been a freelance writer.
Right.
So I've written, I wrote about women in the locker room, which I'm very proud of. Now that's 20 years ago. And this was a woman who was I think the San Diego paper. And she was assigned to the baseball team, whatever that was. And the players didn't like that, and they left a dead rat in her locker. So that was the beginning of a story about what these women were going through, because they loved the game, but they had a deadline to meet. And so they couldn't wait outside while all the guys got the good stuff, and then they would trot out somebody, and then, time's up. So that's one of the things I wrote. I was very proud of that, because at the time they were very, this is before Zoom. This is before even, I guess email was invented then, but it was very hard for them to connect with one another, from Toronto, actually. The woman who was the first assigned reporter to the Blue Jays was Allison something or other, her name, and she was great. She said, I just did it. But the rest of them had to go through hell. And you know who? So that was baseball, football, basketball, and hockey.
Oh, wow.
And who do you think were the best players to cover? Take a guess.
Basketball?
Hockey.
Really?
The hockey players were so grateful to have any interest from a non-Canadian newspaper. They were very good to these reporters, and they understood their issues, and they wanted to be kind. I know.
Wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah, I was amazed. And then one of the stories I did was about for the television station was on alcoholic women. Mm-hmm. And I met a woman who helped establish she and another woman, a place for women alcoholics to talk without men. Because men used to overwhelm the whole conversation. Right. So we became friends, and we wrote a number of things. And one of the things that we wrote was My Mother Was Right. It's a book about baby boomer women and their mothers. So this would be like your grandmother, I think. Yeah. At this point. So our mothers were from the, the 30s and the war, and they wanted us to be good girls, and we objected to everything that they were saying. I think that's just hold on just a second.
Yeah, no worries.
You know, honestly, I'm sorry, I don't know what it is, but it sounds like something's going on. Anyway, the thing about my mother was right, was that we argued with our mothers. We were very obnoxious teenagers. Our mothers wanted us to, I don't know if you've ever heard of a television show called Father Knows Best.
Mm.
Yes. Or, and, you know, our moms did the best they could. They were, if you think about advertising, they were bombarded by, I spent a lot of time in the old section of the University of Cincinnati library with old magazine covers or magazine stories such as Ladies' Home Journal.
Mm.
And this is where you would see ads saying, the woman is like this, oh my God, my husband brought home his boss and I have dishpan hands.
Right.
Ads saying 9 out of 10 doctors recommend Players cigarettes. But always the woman was well attired. She would have, you know, a dress and a nice apron and heels. And that's, after the war, that's what they were asked to be. But in our survey, actually, it turns out that our mothers were very different from that. They were very, they didn't quite fit in that mold, although they wanted to be in there. And they tried to, in their way, teach us what else we could be doing with our lives. And, you know, it was a revelation to us. And one of the things that we learned of many things is that our mothers taught us to be grateful and to be thankful and to say thanks. I don't know about you, but my mother always said, you have to write these thank you notes. Well, doesn't she know I thank her? No, she doesn't. I mean, think about that for yourself. How many do you know who people, somebody gives them something or thanks them for something and they just assume that you say thanks and that's, the deal is done.
Yeah.
But my my friend who I co-wrote this with is a psychologist, and she was on Oprah, and I was on a CBC. We did about 50 radio and TV interviews. It was quite a ride. And we also interviewed a lot of high-profile Canadian and some American women, including Karen Kane from the National Ballet.
Oh, wow.
Of Canada, yeah. And they were also, they had a mother who said, you know, in spite of this and this and this, you can do it. But they were unusual. There was not a lot of, there weren't a lot of people to hold up a beacon for you. So you had to find it where you could.
And so you had mentioned your grade 11 teacher. Was that sort of who you held up as that person? Was there anyone else that sort of comes to mind, or?
You know, I'm sad to say, in the University of Alberta, I would say the best, the person that was most instrumental in me wanting to carry on was a professor in in political science. He was a guy, and he wrote one of my letters to get into graduate school. But I mean, you know, the idea was that you should pledge a sorority, or, you know, should be a good girl and start picking out as you're graduating, you know, find the guy and pick out your, etc.
Right.
So, it's interesting. I think it's very different now from the University of Alberta. I get a lot of, today I got something about, look at this young woman. She's an undergraduate and she needs your support.
Mm.
I mean, they're pretty active in trying to get to University of Alberta graduates to help them.
And so, over your very varied career, what would you say is sort of like the biggest obstacle that you had to face? I know you said it wasn't smooth sailing, so there might be more than one, but.
Well, I think it was, I think for our mothers, they wanted us to have an easier life than they had had. Now, my mom was a school teacher, and she had to go back when my dad lost his job when I was in grade 7. So she was still, making sure that the breakfast table was set. So she had that done. She had to have all of her schoolwork done for the next day. My dad came home. He was a great guy. He was a former sports reporter. But it was my mother's job. And I think they were conflicted about, do we want our daughters to just marry a nice lawyer and settle down? I think they did. But on the other hand, they themselves had to go through so much. So I think that was imprinted on many of us, is that we didn't have to just settle. Let me think what else would have been. I guess I think about law school, and that was so amazingly tough because we weren't good girls. I mean, one of my friends wore a leather jacket to classes, and we were expected to, with our student fee, which was higher than when you were an undergraduate, to take the dean's wife out for dinner. Well, okay, so you laugh.
Yeah, sorry.
But the guys had hired this great band over, I think it was somewhere in a hall somewhere in northeastern Edmonton. And we said, no, we're not taking her out for dinner. We're going to have a party. So, but we didn't have a lot of, I think for young women now, I know it's not easy, but we were just trying to kind of invent ourselves. There really was no guidelines. I mean, there might have been great role models, like I'm not even sure who the Canadians would have been. Maybe if you were an American, it would have been Eleanor Roosevelt. But you were just kind of do your thing.
Yeah, your generation sort of.
Good luck to you, baby.
Well, your generation sort of set at least started some trails for us. So I think it's definitely.
We're happy to do that. I thank God, because we don't want everybody to just say, I'm happy because I met the right guy and, I'm going to settle down. And
yeah, that's actually.
You can even afford a house now.
Yeah. As I said, I'm in both my living room, kitchen, and dining room at one time.
Are you?
So
yeah.
Kind of gives an idea of.
It looks good from the background there. It's looking good.
Well, thank you.
Nice plant.
Yeah, they're pepper plants, actually. So I was very proud of them. But yeah, no, it's definitely different for our generation than it would have been for yours. And then obviously for your parents as well. It's been interesting talking to all the women that I've been able to talk to through this series.
What do you want to do with this when are you looking for particular kinds of people of any age or generation, or?
So we started out with just Victoria and sort of just political figures, and that was great, and it was super interesting. We had Nadine Nakagawa. She was our first speaker, and she's the city councilor out in New Westminster. And so that was really interesting having her. But then we started to ask around for recommendations, and there's just so many women that were put forward as recommendations that were not necessarily within those parameters, but being a little bit selfish on my part, I was like, I'm going to interview them anyways. because I would like to hear their story. And so now we've essentially expanded to all women and people of marginalized genders in essentially any position of leadership or just of interest, really. Like I said, I'm in biology, and we have a wide array of people who are in our club, and so
That's good.
yeah, no, it's great, and we want to provide as much inspiration as possible and sort of give everybody an idea of what's out there, how they got there, and sort of provide inspiration in different ways.
I would just say, when you asked me a bit, I touched upon my political involvement. You know, I obviously I did not become an American citizen. And I always was, most of my life, you know, obviously not a Republican, but I couldn't, especially when I worked for the Canadian government, you had to be very neutral.
Right.
But absorb a lot of information and know what you thought. But I would say when I moved back to Canada, I became, especially, I think it's very hard on Vancouver Island, but I became a liberal again, because I really believed in what I had learned growing up. I mean, they're not saints involved here, but I think the center, I don't see a center now in the United States. And actually, I don't see a center on Vancouver Island. I see it's pretty much green or orange, or, you know, we have to have a way. This is a larger issue about understanding the other point of view. And I have to say that I don't think I would do very well right now talking to a Republican. But, you know, well, 72 million of them voted for, you know who. But I think that's what's happening now to our world, even though that's in the United States. But when I was doing calling in this last election, I have to tell you that people, when I told them I was calling on behalf of the Liberal candidate in Saanich North Islands, they were really rude, hanging up on me. And you know, another woman that was doing calling, who's lived a long time, not me, said there's something seeping over the border here. And it's this, do you know what I'm talking about? It's just this anger, and I don't want to hear the other person, and it's all a plot, or.
Yeah, I was raised in a very conservative family.
Right.
Yes, very Alberta, oil and gas, and that's fine. But then moving out to BC was a bit of a culture shock. Yeah.
Yeah.
And sort of since then, I've definitely changed my viewpoint. And it's interesting going home at breaks and at Christmas, or in the summers as well, because I do feel that there has been sort of something that has come across the border, some sort of atmosphere, and it makes family discussions about politics very interesting.
You know, when I was growing up, my parents voted for the Liberals. I never knew anybody else who did.
Right.
But there you were. I mean, and I think here, I think it's some of the same thing. You know, I mean, it's not the same thing about, I understand what you're saying about conservative Albertans. But there's a lot of we've got it all right here. We've got the answers here, and it's, you know, you've got to do what we want you to do, or the world will be in flames. And I think for young people like yourselves, as older people, it's harder and harder to listen to the other thing, but you should be able to do that better than we can.
I try my best to keep all sides in mind, but it is, sometimes it's harder than others.
Yeah. Well, it's been fun talking to you.
Yeah, you as well.
I'm delighted to meet you.
Yeah, I wish we could have done this in person, but
Yeah.
unavoidable.
Today's Dr. Bonnie, that's tough.
Yeah, well, and obviously it's across the country now, so I thought the island was doing better than it is, so that was a bit of a
A
news
shock.
flash for me today. Yeah,
Yeah.
been living in a little
Apparently,
bubble.
a lot of these are people coming to the island.
I could see that. It's hard when we're the only sort of tropical vacation of
Yeah, I
Canada people
know.
can get now. But I mean, been living in a pretty good bubble at my house, so doing our best.
And all your classes are online? Or no, you can't do that, can you, if you're a biology major?
So I don't have any more. I have a few labs, but they're online. I do have one seminar that's in person, actually, but there's only 22 of us, and we're in like a 300-person lecture hall, so we have a fair amount of space. And then I'm doing my honors this year, so I do some lab work, but it's only my supervisor, a postdoc, and then me, so it's pretty quiet in there as well. But those are my two human contacts for the week, which is always nice to have.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
I don't know. Lena was telling me about the people she knew who were still taking all classes like in law school. It just sounds terrible.
yeah, I don't know, even I feel really bad for the first year university students where this will be their first experience of what should be a hectic but fun time with
And
way too
meeting
many people.
people. Yeah, meeting
Yeah.
people. My best friend, and she's in Vancouver. She's a psychiatrist, and she was my roommate in first year university. So that's what you will be missing, I think.
Yeah, I think I would probably defer, in all honesty, if I was entering my first year. I might take a year off just because obviously I learned things in first year, but I feel like the more important thing was building those sort of social relationships. Even with this club, like with the lecturer, we had quite a long meeting talking about it at the beginning of the year because we were like, how are we going to connect with new members, being like, come on this Zoom call with a whole set of strangers. This is as great as we're going to get as far as like social connection goes. It's definitely been
That's tough.
Yeah, it's a year of innovation, that's for sure.
Well, good for you. So you're not letting it stop you.
We're trying our best. But
well, good luck on your project, I guess. Is that it?
Yeah, thank you so much. And we will be posting the interview probably in a month because we just have a set lined up to post. But I'll send you an email with it. And again, thank you so much for doing this call with me. I really do appreciate it. And
You're very welcome.
if anyone has any questions, do you mind if I just forward them on over to you?
Sure.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Have a good rest of your evening, night.
You too.
Thanks so much.
Good night.
Good night.